Hello and welcome to another episode of Father and Joe. I'm Joe Rockey here with Father Boniface Hicks. And Father, I want to have a conversation with you that sometimes can get muddled because it seems as though I'm comparing one thing to another. And that's not what I'm trying to do. I want to emphasize that very hard from the beginning of this episode. But since having our conversation over the last two episodes, particularly about Eucharistic miracles and believing without seeing, you had mentioned a couple of things that have really stood out to me and really had me open my eyes and thinking about the Gospels in a different way. And one of the things that you said that really stood out with me was, hey, these Eucharistic miracles are obviously miracles. And the video that was accompanied with everyone in the description, if you didn't go down and watch it, watch that YouTube video. But the thing that stood across for me with it was when you said they actually were lesser miracles than the Eucharist itself. Because in the Eucharist itself, you get the body, blood, soul, and divinity of Jesus. Whereas in a Eucharist miracle, it turns into the heart and blood, etc., but doesn't have the soul and divinity as if the Eucharist proper does. And then we had a little bit of a conversation about how it was natural for when Jesus said, I can forgive sins, that the authority of the day pushed back. You can't just have someone claiming they're God without any proof. But this is one of the things that I point out now versus then. The people who were in the gospel were living it in the present tense. We are able to see it knowing how the story ends, knowing that Jesus is God, he resurrected himself, he ascended himself back to heaven. And the thought that I had there was we can all see the big highlight moments and the miracles, the transfiguration, the dove coming down to him after his baptism. But I think that some of the moments that are most important are the ones that don't get a miracle punctuating them. And I think that, again, I return to the initiation of the Eucharist as one of them, and him flat out being born as God as being one of them. And those two thought processes were going through my head, as well as some teachings I had growing up saying that, if it wasn't for Easter, Christmas wouldn't matter. And going off of the conversations that we had last time, I was like, I'm not sure that that's actually a true statement. I get why you might say that to a second grader, but because in a second grader, he's stuck in the secular world with Santa Claus and you get all the presents at Christmas and that's super important. And you probably just wanted me to pay attention about Easter. But I'm not sure that in the grand scheme of things that any of the parts of the church should be one is greater or superior than the other. And this might be a totally wrong thinking and thought process that came out of it, but just sitting back and thinking about those facts, Christmas, the forgiveness of sins, and the institution of the Eucharist, how powerful they are and how celebrating them and believing them is our people who live in the future from the Bible way of truly believing without seeing. So those were the thoughts that really came to me after editing our last two episodes that have been sitting with me that I wanted to dive into more because I still have questions and potentially even in that answer, parts I'm wrong on. So if we can dive in deeper, I think that would be an awesome episode.
Yeah, thanks, Joe. It's you brought back some key points from those previous episodes, and yeah, the basic logic is that God is drawing forth faith from us. And so faith is always going to lack a certain amount of evidence. We get evidence up to a certain point, and then we take a leap of faith. We choose to believe. We choose to trust is really where faith is. We choose to trust, which is both intellectual, believing something that we can't see, and is a matter of the will, that we're willing to actually place the weight of our lives on it in some degree. It's not an abstract idea, but it makes a concrete difference. And whether I'm going to lean on it or not. So there's always going to be, the Lord's always drawing us into faith, because he doesn't want to force us. He wants us to love him. And we can't love if we're forced. Love always requires freedom. And if freedom always has evidence, like whatever, so much evidence that you don't have a choice to believe or disbelieve, then it's not freedom. It's not love. It's forced. So it doesn't take any faith to believe that 1 + 1 is 2. That's as clear as day. To not believe that means that you have a mental disorder, and there's no trust that's necessary there. For you to say, I have $2 in my wallet, well, that requires some trust on my part, but it can also be demonstrated. You can actually show me $2, and then I don't have any choice but to believe that. So there was trust required at first. When you show me, there's no more need for trust. And so, but God, again, doesn't want to prove himself to us to such a degree that it eliminates all of the need for trust. He wants to keep open a space for trust, because, again, if you tell me you have $2 in your wallet, if your marriage consisted of always requiring demonstrations from the other to prove that what you're saying is true, your marriage would not last very long. When Teresa tells you something, you're going to believe it. And, there's a growing process in that. She proved it a couple of times, or maybe when you were dating, maybe some things, the ship has sailed long ago, and you just automatically trust certain things. And that's part of love. That's the love that bonds you together, which is stronger than any evidence, really. So the Lord is always leading us up to a place. He's giving us a certain amount of evidence, but then he's always stopping at a certain point to give us room for trust. And that's why he says to Thomas, after he lets him probe his hands and his side, and he says, blessed are those who believe, but more blessed are those who see and believe. More blessed are those who do not see and yet believe. And that's the blessing. That's the blessed life. That's the blessed relationship of love that God wants to draw us into. And so again, he gives certain evidences around certain things. And so, yeah, the virgin birth is a pretty big miracle in terms of the incarnation. Actually, it's even more properly said, the virginal conception and the virgin birth. So that's a very interesting thing that we believe. It's not dogmatic, but we believe that Mary was physically intact after giving birth. So you know what that means, I suppose. But certainly she conceived without the help of a man. She conceived by the power of the Holy Spirit. And so that virginal conception and even arguably virgin birth are miracles that point to, but what do they point to? They don't prove that Jesus is God. There could have been a virginal conception of a really great man. So they point to it, but they don't prove it. And so even though we have the evidence, wow, and then it kind of makes sense. It's fitting. Well, if God were going to take flesh and come among us, and how would he enter the world? What sign, what miracle, whatever. Well, that's a pretty good one. Sure. So it makes sense. But then, as you're saying, forgiveness of sins, or the confection of the Eucharist, Jesus made gestures and changed the Passover meal in ways that would have been striking enough for the apostles that they understood to some degree what he was doing, but the bread still looked like bread in his hands, and the wine still looked like wine in the chalice. And so their faith would have to develop and be able to embrace that more and more fully. And in some sense, the whole faith of the church has had to develop in order to really pull apart what's happening in the Eucharist and make the kinds of clear statements that we make now, I believe that the Eucharist is truly the body, blood, soul, and divinity of Jesus Christ. So that took a long time to formulate that clear of a saying, and required some teasing out, some belief, some faith over time. And then, like you said, the resurrection obviously has some clear signs. He did appear to those, and they are able to give witness. But for most of us, we don't have that evidence. We don't have the evidence of having seen him. We have the evidence of people telling us that they saw him. We don't even have the evidence of people telling us that they saw him. We have the evidence of people telling, down through the ages. Not just any people, but the apostles. And, you can keep building up the evidence. They risked their lives based on what they saw. That doesn't make sense for people who are putting forth a hoax,
Mm-hmm.
So you can kind of tease apart all of those objections, and you can go back and forth, and you can say, it's really good evidence. It doesn't prove it. At the end of the day, there's always room for and need for faith, because God doesn't want our slavish obedience. He wants our love. And love requires a free act of the will, a decision to believe that what he said about himself and what he's established in his church and what he's put forth throughout 2,000 years of history now, that it's true. And that's an individual choice. No one can force you, not even God chooses not to. And we have to make the decision to believe. And so that's why a Eucharistic miracle gives a little more evidence. This is not normal bread. At least you can say that. This is not normal bread. And the fact that, that hasn't happened in Lutheran services, as far as I know, well, it's saying something about the Catholic Mass. Catholic hosts consecrated through the words of the Eucharistic prayer are the ones that have become flesh in, 10 or 20 cases throughout the course of the past 1,500 years. That hasn't happened anywhere else. And so that says something. It says that this is not normal bread. Does it say this is the body, blood, soul, and divinity of Jesus Christ? Well, again, it doesn't prove that, but it gives good evidence. And that evidence helps us to say, okay, I don't have to believe this. I could have doubts, but I'm convinced. I'm moving forward with this. I accept this on faith.
You just made me think of a question that might be a little bit offset, but I'm going to ask it anyway. In the past, you mentioned that there were, aside from Roman Catholics, a number of other, I don't know if sect is the right word, but denominations of the Christianity that listen to the Pope, and they're kind of all considered in line with the Pope. Have any of them ever had a Eucharistic miracle, or is it only those that have come through the Roman Catholic highway? I don't even know what the right way of describing that is.
Yeah, there are 21 other rites in the Catholic Church, in addition to the Roman Catholic rite. They are often called, using a Latin term, sui juris. They have their own law. And so they're governed by their own principles and their own ritual formulas and a number of things, their own hierarchy. But yes, all under the ultimate jurisdiction of the Pope. I don't know. I'm not aware of Eucharistic miracles in other rites, but I wouldn't be surprised, but I don't know, not necessarily. It's again, that doesn't prove or disprove, right? So even what I said about the Lutherans, it's not happening in Lutheran churches. It may not be happening in Byzantine churches either. But anyway, it is happening in the Roman Catholic Church. So there's something different going on here that God is drawing our attention to. And yeah.
It's an interesting, like I said, these conversations, I use them as thinking of not just, hey, this is a cool thing to talk about the Father for a couple of hours a month, but actually to, dive in and reflect upon, because there is something that going to mass and having a deeper thought than just what is the words coming out, or am I standing up when I'm supposed to? Am I kneeling when I'm supposed to? Am I doing the basic requirements? But actually diving in deeper, that changes and reorients the experience in a way that I don't think I'm capable of really describing well. I can just tell you flat out, it's better, it's more meaningful, and it definitely has other results in other aspects of life that I wouldn't have had otherwise. The only real example I can have of this is like stretching. You know, stretching doesn't necessarily make you stronger, doesn't make you have the ability to go run further without getting out of wind, but it certainly helps. It certainly keeps things from getting pulled and you hurting as much. And I think that in a very real way that people disregard the spiritual life that has way more detriments than not stretching. But that's like a very watered down analogy that I can think of. And these conversations of what's going on and being able to have faith without seeing, I think is a big part of embracing the mysteries of the faith. So, Father, I want to give you a chance here to conclude this episode as we have a couple minutes left to bring it in.
Yeah, it was with somebody recently who was actually the brother of a doctor, and I think he also works for medical insurance or something. Anyway, he was saying he's promoting the idea we have a lot of things about health. We even talk about brain health, or we talk about, exercise, stretching, like you were saying. We talk about nutrition. We talk about health, and he's promoting the idea of spiritual health. And it's a nice way to frame that, similar to what you were just doing. We are focused on health and a lot of other things. Why not be focused on spiritual health? And spiritual health actually influences, it turns out, physical health and emotional health, psychological health. So if our spiritual health, our relationship with God is in the right order, then the other things kind of come along with it to a certain degree. And that spiritual health, just to tie it together with our topic here, is ultimately based on love. How much do you trust God? And that should never be a kind of judgment or condemnation, but just seeing that our life, our spiritual health, is on a spectrum, it's on a scale, and I can grow in trust in God. And how do I do that? Well, I prioritize the things of God. And I say, well, even though I don't feel like, I got a whole bunch of stuff to do, but I spent an hour this morning praying, because that's part of my spiritual health plan. And even though I don't walk out of that prayer time and go, oh, the day is so much better, I know that in the long run, even though it might actually relieve a little stress today to get some of the work done that I got to get done, it's going to be good for me, better for me, in fact, to tend to my spiritual health, so that I can trust in God, so that when I don't get the work done, or when things go wrong with the work or whatever else, then I also realize, well, actually the work is of relative value. It's not an ultimate value. And all of the work will fade away and God will be left. And so I'm glad that I prioritized that. But anyway, thinking in terms of spiritual health and what are the practices and priorities and investments of time and even money, certainly energy and attention, what are the ways that we can do that will best promote our spiritual health?
And what a beautiful way to think about that as we carry this through the week. So we thank you all for being with us, and we will be with you again next week.